we're very lucky to have. I think Pat was the first person that I met at the first meeting for the IWGS that I went to many years ago. And he took us on a trek with some canoes down a stream on a promise that it was going to be beautiful. We thought he was crazy. It was buggy, hot, a lot of walking with canoes instead of floating in canoes, and then it did open up, and it was probably one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had. He knows as much about Florida wildlife, plant life, just being in wild Florida. And we invited him to speak about invasive species because I'm pretty sure Florida, are we like the world's capital of invasive species here?
It depends on who you talk to, but number 5 to number 1.
Okay, so somewhere in the top 5. But he knows just about everything.
Just about everything, maybe a lot about nothing too. So this is the first time I've been back to Naples Botanical Gardens in 15 or 16 years. It was under construction, the big lily pool. It was done by a swimming pool company, and they purchased the pond liner from me and said, "We don't know how to sing this." So that was the last time I was here. Seen the liner, and that was it. So I'm excited to go around the gardens in the next day or so. In another lifetime, I was an aquatic applicator. So all these nasty things I have close and personal experience with. The world's breeders. I'm going to do a little reading in certain points because it's going to come back, and these points are pretty important. Right, depending on who you talk to, I have read we are number 1 in the most invasive species in the world, and some of these are the most invasive species in the world. Viruses, bacteria, all the way up to mammals. Around Silver Spring, we have the rhesus macaque, which are dangerous in themselves now. They're carrying a herpes virus, so that's something you don't even want to, mess with feeding those guys. Of the 1,500 native species been documented and established in Florida, many of those are landscape plants and don't present the danger of altering the environment so much. In the wet areas, the 150 species of exotics that occur in Florida natural areas, where we suppress species biodiversity, alter ecosystems, and overtake native plants. So in our wet areas, in all these lakes, and this is just for public lake areas, 96% of Florida public waters contain 1 or more non-native aquatic plants. 18 of those 26 are considered harmful to be invasive. So I'm going to show you later on an area, a map, that's probably about 10 to 15 million acres. So in Florida alone, 1.7 million acres of Florida's natural areas have been overrun with more than 500 different non-native plants and animals. And when I say overrun, that's not just an occasional, Brazilian pepper tree or the Melaleuca tree popping up here. I mean, 50 or 100 acres of monoculture of plants. Virtually no other life. Our expenditures on average run about $52 to $54 million. Annually in the United States, that approaches $2 to $4 trillion to control exotic invasives. And that's mammals, that's plants, that's fish, that's it. All right. So we're going to concentrate on this area. I'm going to concentrate on what we all love, our aquatics, our plants, and our fish. The headwaters, this whole system is the Everglades. It's not just down here. The Everglades traditionally started just south of Disney World. The water flowed out of the Kissimmee, the lake, Kissimmee River chain of lakes that flowed into the Kissimmee River and Natural River with a 1 to 2 mile floodplain. That oscillated back and forth during the wet season, and the floodplain was quite wide during a rainy season. It then flowed into Lake Okeechobee. That's North America, one of North America's largest lakes, 739 some odd square miles. It's basically a shallow marsh. It was and still is averages 3 feet deep. The western side of the lake is very shallow. Over on the east side, you get some 8 to 12 foot depths in there. That lake produced some of our nicest little hybrids, the Okeechobee water lake. I saw it growing out there in 8 to 12 foot of water, crystal clear water, pads on that thing with this big. Because we've got lots of nutrients, lots of phosphorus coming into it, just absolutely gorgeous. Didn't at the time know where it was. I'm not sure if it was in the trade at that point. It's been so long ago. So all that water sheet flowed from the Kissimmee River Basin up here into Lake Okeechobee through this area. On 80% of that water coming down through the southwest. We have a little Atlantic Ridge area here. And that put 20% of the water down into the Miami area, into the Biscayne Aquifer, and it flows out into Florida Bay. It's a water-driven system with 53 or 54 inches of annual rainfall, most of that occurring in the hurricane season, June 1st to November 30th. And with the bulk of that occurring from basically end of July through September. Peak hurricane season starts now in September. That's when we get our big tropical storms and all the rain. We'll see 1 inch to 3 inches of water an hour in some of these storms. And they're isolated. Where I work, just east of here a little bit, we haven't had any rain, hardly significant amounts, just trace amounts in a week to 10 days. But I'm watching these downbursts come down, and you know they're dropping inches and inches of water. They're just isolated. The thing is, they say in Florida, if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. Pass. So the trouble with invasive species in this area. So how many of you have a garden of weeding? You go to hands. How much of the time do you do in your nurseries do you spend weeding? I had somebody tell me, it's like, well, you try to get ahead of it before weeding becomes a full-time job. Well, let's put this in perspective. You know, you've got your 1/4 acre lot, you got your 5 or 10 acre nursery, and it's a big job. You know, you're weeding, you're mowing, you're getting all that under control. But let's wrap our heads around this. This area in here is probably 10 to 15 million acres. We've got, here's where we are right here. That's the Naples Botanical Gardens. This is basically Choppy, Florida, Big Cypress National Preserve, Everglades National Park. We have the Everglades Agricultural Area, which is pretty much they do their own stuff. Go back some more. We have right here Arthur C. Marshall National Wildlife Refuge, Waxahachie area. This is Dupuy area, natural area. Total like 30 to 40,000 open areas there. So it's a huge amount of area that's under public domain. And you just don't go and spot these things. Yeah. One of our first things, how many of y'all have problems with hogs? Live in the southeast? Yeah, we've seen them. So people ask me all the time, don't you have hogs on your property? No, thank goodness. This is a kind of, oops. It looks like a plow goes through there. And if you're ever in a natural area, it'll cross a trail or something like that, and you're going over it. It's pretty treacherous territory. Brought in with the Spanish explorers back in the 1500s. They either escaped from them, then it became farmed, they escaped from enclosures, and they do quite well at breeding. Now, during the early 1900s, the Russian wild boar introduced for hunting reasons. In 1982, they were reported in 16 states. By 2021, 35 states are reporting significant populations. I mean, they go heavily in the southeast, all the way up to either Vermont or New Hampshire. They're starting to through the Ohio, southeastern, southwestern Ohio in a big way. The Appalachian region has them, so they're going to continue to spread.
And they're in Canada too.
Say again?
They're in Canada too. Wow.
Population is estimated at 6 million and rapidly expanding. I mean, I don't know what the litters are, but the litters could be 8 to 15 little pellets per. In Florida, there's no restrictions on hunting. On private land, you don't have to have a license. You can hunt day or night. That's how invasive they're considered by the Game and Fish Commission. On public lands, you have to be licensed, but there's still no restrictions for seasonal wildlife. Fortunately, in the interior, the map that I showed, it's pretty wet seasonally, so they haven't really made their way into it. But in Lockley, we're northwest 25 miles here, where they have the ranch lands and a little higher. They're out there in the way. All right, here's our natural areas again. I mentioned all this. So Big Cypress National Preserve is 739 square miles, 730,000 acres. We have Everglades National Park, one of the largest national parks east of the Mississippi, at 1.4 million acres. Fakahatchee Strand State Park Reserve, 88,000 acres, one of our largest state parks. That used to be one of the largest cypress stands in North America. All the cypress, 90% of them were logged out of South Florida in the early 1900s until 1958, when the last sawmill shut down. So when you cross over going on your tour, notice in these cypress domes, which are round structures, and cypress strands, which are long and linear, ancient riverbeds, that kind of thing, knowing that those trees are probably only 50 to maybe 100 years old. They're big zone, cypress are a slow grower, but they were harvested out. Then you have a failed development, which is now Picayune Strand State Forest. This is, I believe, Rookery Bay National Wildlife Refuge. We have right up here, Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge, Rukawissa Slough, and I forget what this one is, but just these acres in here is roughly 2.5 million acres of public land. Really important because 80% of our population in Florida lives on the coast, on Naples, Fort Myers, of course down in Miami. So by protecting these areas, closing up the ditches, it allows that water to stay, perk into the aquifer. Because in recent history, in the last 20 to 30 years, certain municipal wells on the coast were going dry because the water was flowing so fast off because the ditches that were done in the late 1800s all the way up to the 1950s were very effective. Even 20-foot top of the bank ditches flowing tens and hundreds of thousands of gallons a minute, flowing off either into the Gulf or off into the Atlantic Ocean. So by sealing those, our water woes are a lot better. And that's some of the stuff you don't hear on the national news. You hear red tides on the West Coast, high bacteria counts on here, but there's a lot of good stuff going on, more than our talk goes into some of that. So in addition, remember that other public lands, National Wildlife Refuge here, Miccosukee Indian Reservation is right here, and then you have multiple STAs, they're called, stormwater treatment areas. They're diked off, sometimes water drains into them, other times it's physically pumped with massive pumps into this area, so it does not flow off quickly. For instance, we have several small ones, and I say small ones, are 2,500 to 5,000 acres in this region. So instead of that drop of water hitting here, running off to the east through a canal in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, we'll pump this water up into the 2,500 acre reservoir, where that drop of water may stay for 1 to 3 months, depending on the size of that. So the sediment drops out, the plants that naturally establish in these wetland cells take up the nitrogen and phosphorus, then gravity feeds back into the original canal and hopefully treat it much better than it is. So, a little history on this area. All right, we'll get into the plants. Some of the most invasive, and I'm kind of go back and forth a little bit. At the end of the talk, I'll go through what I think are the most invasive items that we have. Brazilian pepper, Beautiful little berries brought in for the ornamental trade. You can see this if you go to the grocery store, see a mixed pepper grinder or something like that. It has red berries. That's Brazilian pepper in there. It's bitter. It's nasty. I wouldn't have it. But it's a unique selling field. Voucher, it is somewhat tropical, so it's vouchered here. I've seen it in the Tallahassee area up in this region. So when you see these USDA masks being vouchered, it's a hit and miss. That means somebody, a researcher or scientist, is taking the time, definitely ID the plant, send it to the USDA and voucher it in a particular location. I found 2 of them down this region that weren't vouchered with some researchers from Fairchild Botanical Gardens. It was Sagittaria filiformis. Wow, look at this. It looks like just the springs in Central Florida. So looking at these maps, you never know. It's always hit and miss. Another really bad invader, the Mount Or paperbark tree. It has very dense stands. Some of the stands of small trees, meaning the 12 to 16 foot size, can be over 400 trees per acre. The seeds, a mature tree, a 12 to 16 inch caliber tree that's 36 foot tall, can have 6 million seeds per individual tree. It was brought in to drain the swamps. It's originally from Australia, and it does a good job there. A lot of it was done in the early 1900s around the base of Lake Okeechobee, being basically they had a very small ditch. They had a devastating hurricane in 1928, which over 2,000 people perished. Also in that storm, there's a mass grave right to the east of that. People were buried, and also in West Palm Beach. So the flooding from that storm was severe. So they planted these mounds that was all around the southern edge to help stabilize what little bank they had, what little dike they had. Right after that, the Army Corps of Engineers pledged to build a dike by 1933. They have works what we have now. It's about a 12, 15 foot tall dike, the Herbert Hoover dike. You can see the seeds, clusters here, and it's called the paper bark. This is the hard one on the inside. It is quite hard. And this peeler, that's probably an inch or 2 of peeling paper bark on the outside. When you get a stand like this in the upper left, there's really nothing else underneath it. There's no wildlife value. Some of these trees have some kind of chemical property that nothing will just sprout in the mulch there. We all know this one, maybe, right? Brought in notes here, in the 1800s, an agricultural expedition. And how many years later? This was 18. Something, next slide has it here. So yeah, 1884, New Orleans Exposition, Ag Exposition. By 96, so that's 12 years later, it was spread to the St. Johns River. Have you ever been to Jacksonville? That river can be 3 miles wide in some places, even longer. So mechanical harvesting, when you look at the historical pictures, it's just fun. It's like, no, you're not. You're putting a drop in the bucket there. So finally, by 1947, the modern chemical industry, they came up with 2,4-D, which was very effective. And different formulations are still used today, which are quite effective. So 2020, 25,000 acres of trees just in Florida. And that was a mix of water hyacinth, water lettuce. And that's on public acres. That doesn't include any private ponds or ditches on farmlands. It's huge. With many of these invasive species, we're in a control mode. Eradication would be impossible. On the left, little makeshift grapple from 1916, is it? Yeah, 1916. This is from the 50s and 60s on the St. Johns River. Here was a beautiful Florida river, totally impassable. The same with the water lettuce. Spreads by sowing seeds, breaking it apart, mechanical harvesting.
Hey, Pat,
It's very expensive.
when the hyacinths coalesce like that and they block out all the sun, how does that affect the fish?
Oh, it's definitely. I'll go into that a little bit more.
Okay.
For all these species, it just changes the environment to anything that was native, anything that's good about that environment is now pretty much lost, if left alone. So there's debate about whether water lettuce is native or not. Here's William Bartram's 1765 expedition in Florida, and he has this little water lettuce in the picture there. Of course, lotus, apple snails, and other things. So regardless, it's now really taking over like crazy. Now, notice here, got a huge Stanley Mountain tree right along the canal. So with a lot of these aquatics, the water hyacinth, the water lettuce, reduced by seeds, stolons, fragmentation, mechanical harvesting, progress through the metal that help dispersing. Mosquitoes can get in there and underneath. Fish can't get up in there, and they'll lay the larvae in these little pools of water in the weeds and so forth. Dense mats prevent air, light fusion into the water, consume oxygen, displacing native fish and plants, preventing decomposition of the dryas. These coverage of stands will also limit the light so no other macro aquatics can grow underneath. So basically that's it. If you have tape grass or Sagittaria underneath, it's not going to get enough light, it's going to die off. And the shedding from those, I quit growing water lettuce. You ever clean out a tank of water lettuce and the muck and it doesn't break down in there? Not too fun. The mats jam up against water control structures. Not to mention, you got a little canal and you want to get your kayak and you load it out and get it. Also, you have a situation like that, so called waterfront property, and it's not waterfront, it's covered in water lettuce. I drill, you don't know about that. In the New York symposium, is it 92, correct me if I'm wrong. Folks had a lot of hydrilla in their water garden areas. I'm like, is that a real issue? It's a federal noxious plant. So, we have more trouble with the naiad species, the southern naiads and all that. So they're dealing with it. Now, at one point, we covered the whole the pond in front of the National Mall. It's loaded with hydrilla. Now, I was told this. I would bring bird had a nursery over in Ruston, Florida, outside of Tampa. And the guys that took over, I'm not old enough to know what Robert Greenberg, unfortunately. The brothers that bought the property told me he brought in the hydrilla called Star of India because they had that little red tip to it like that. So I took that for face value, whether it's true or not. But apparently he was the one that brought that back. Now, again, with the USDA maps, it's down here. That's Collier County here, Monroe County. I've got it on the Turner River. I'm sure it's all through here. Or this is Martin County. We're loaded with it here where I live. One you're not too familiar with it that people here in Florida are is called torpedo grass. It's a panicum. There's good panicums. Panicum hematoma is a wonderful habitat plant for fish. This one creates these dense mats that just crawl across the surface of the water. And it's called torpedo grass. If you've ever done any aquascaping in an area, you know you don't really want to run into them. Because this little point is very sharp. It'll go right through your heel. Very pointy little rise up. And it can make its way underground to pretty much anything there.
Pat, is that the same one that grows on land too?
It does.
Okay.
Or like oil mats and turf grass and everything, yeah. And it's very difficult to control. You really need to know your herbicide applications. It's a glyphosate controlled product, but at 2 to 5% rate, which is a pretty high rate for glyphosate. And you need to add suppressants to it. And one thing they don't tell you unless you go to herbicide school is drop the pH of your spray solution. Little things like that go a long way. Not more chemical necessarily, but just how you apply things. So difficult to control these 2 of the applications. Or one way to control. I had an area in my pond when it's in 10 to 12 foot cypress trees. Now they're 28 foot canopy. Not enough light for torpedo grass anymore. So that side of the bank is clear. Grouping these together, some of the underwater and emergent macrophytes, monopoly brought in from the aquarium trade, parrot's feather, all these can just pretty much ruin, you want to go out and fish there, forget it, you're not getting your motorboat through there. Same with parrot's feather, and all these can cause drainage areas, culverts, their overflows, that kind of thing, so they can need constant maintenance. Ludwigias. There's a lot of great Ludwigias, Woodies comes to mind. I don't think that would ever be an issue here in Florida because the tug pressure is pretty good, the little caterpillars, the leaf rollers, that kind of thing. But we do have one that came in the early 1900s, Ludwigia peruviana, primrose willow. It's a woody, sprawling shrub, 12, 15 feet tall. It grows wet, grows a little bit dry. A new invader, Ludwigia, somebody?
Heploides? Heploides?
No, anyway, if you want to know the actual name of a heptapetalor or something like that, it looks like Ludwigia rabbits on steroids. The red Ludwigia is nice and small and delicate. Well, the rosette on that can be 2 or 3 inches in diameter. It'll crawl across the surface of the water, then crawl up and take over things like pickerel and just grow. More of our favorite money makers, right? So this is Cristata, and this is up in South Carolina in the Santee Cooper Basin. So you see that some of these, those lakes are 700, 1,500 acres in size. So I would hazard a guess on how many acres the Cristata is taking over. Terrible for small backyard ponds. I got my first in 40s indica, somebody hired me to spray it out. And I'm going through the literature for this talk, and some of the IFAS, which is University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, great resource for native and non-natives as well. And that's where a lot of my references come from. So they describe Nymphoides indica, but what I think they're describing is Nymphoides Humboldtiana. The leaf size wasn't right. When I called in to spray this out, the leaves were 12 to 14 inches in diameter plus on the Nymphoides indica. This gentleman fed his fish, he probably in a small, 0.15 acre pond, probably 60 foot by 40 foot. He was feeding a pound or so a day of fish feed. So a lot of nutrients going into that, and the indica just loved it. So they can take it over pretty crazy. This is now prohibited in Florida. I think they pelletized this. So I quit growing it many years ago because of the bug pressure, the chemical pressure on it. Okay, Rotella indica. I found that a while back, fell in love with it, and get a call from, I had a really good friend who was a land manager, water management district, and now his 2 sons have gone on to work in invasive species. And I get a call from Jake that says, well, you grow that? And, oh, we're thinking of putting that on the prohibited list. I'm like, great, as soon as I get a plant, you're gonna put it on there. But it can, cause some headaches. This is a canal, the creek across the canal. But my response to that is, well, what are you gonna do? You're gonna, and all these canals were put in for bug control. All the hurricanes that killed all these people, we needed to fix this. So everybody blames the water management districts, but their number one job is flood control. So when you have these canals like this, they need to stay open and routinely ahead of time, ahead of our rainy season. So the water does drain off in this. They're all structured. And I know guys in the engineering department, and they're like all over this. The week before, they're just 20 hours a day monitoring this kind of stuff and all the controls that need to go on. So it is an issue, but there are other controls. Grass starts to be a great control for something like this. But that has its disadvantages as well. They indiscriminately eat anything the grass carp do. So they may eat species. But in a more conveyance canal, it needs to stay open for certain periods of time. All right. This is a bane of my existence. I had this on my property and it goes like crazy. Old world climbing fork. fern. There's two different species. It'll just make a mess of a forest. You see, I think these are cypress trees going all the way at the top of that. You can see the effort he's going into. Well, I don't know what to do and control this. He's working a chainsaw, and it's a very thin. Gosh, it's half a millimeter in size vine that all these leaves are attached to. But it's very woody. I mean, you couldn't, if you had 3 or 4 strands, you couldn't break it apart with your hands. So you go in and cut it with a chainsaw and then treat it with a life sleeve around that type of, basically a garden one as well. But it can grow very, very fast. Sure. But one leaf, I'm going from memory here, because I can't see my notes. One leaflet, about the size of my little fingernail, can have 26,000 spores. And look at the picture, and he's, he's in there, how many leaflets are on there?
Where's that from?
Oh, anywhere. Anywhere.
No, I mean, where did it come in from? Do you know where it's named?
Oh, yeah, well, it was first came in, Delray Beach, and found in a nursery. Next slide, I have that. No, came in a nursery in Delray Beach, about 1957. By 19, and I'm mixing my dates up, 1958, it was found naturalized in Martin County, which is 2 counties about 80 miles north. 1979, one of my botany field trips, my first experience in invasive plants, we picked this out, natural area in Martin County. That was 1979. Back to my notes, because this is pretty crazy numbers on this. 1965, I found in the wall. 1978 was well established. From 1993 to 2005, the increase in acreage. 1979, we had 27,000 documented acres. In 2005, there were 122,700 documented acres. It's one of the most detrimental and hard to control plants that we have because of the spores, windborne spores like any farm. And it's not particular where it grows, wetlands, drylands. Another tree like the Melaleuca or the Brazilian pepper forms very dense monocultures. It's Australian pine or President. It's not a pine at all, it's a hardwood. The only advantage it has, it makes for great smoking wood, very light smoke. Some of our regional people use it to smoke their fish with, so it is good for that. But you can see in this picture on the lower left, it's been mowed and maintained, but look at all this root suckers coming up. And on the interior, it's just nothing but Australian pine. This is all the mulch from the leaves. Nothing seems to grow in there. Nothing will sprout. There's a chemical reaction from the leaves. I'm not sure. The most pigment. I read once that it was the most invasive species on Earth. In Asia, it takes over rice paddies, wet growing areas, that kind of thing. I'm going to read some of this to get it right, because it's a pretty incredible story. First collected in 1953, potential cultivation of nursery stock. 1985, large infestations were noted in South Florida. It was now estimated to cover 1,000 acres. Now there's an active there since the early 80s. I-95 wasn't completed through Martin and northern Palm Beach County until the early 80s. So it was a big gap for years there. And a buddy of mine worked for South Florida Management District. He was that kind of years, a young guy back in 82 or 83. He actually showed me a picture from that era. And they were out surveying the site. We found it when they were developing I-95. Said, "Oh, this is crazy what's out there." So he worked in natural resource management for 30 years. Ended up retiring and said, "I'm done with this. My insurance costs me too much, and I'm drinking too much beer. I need to go back to work." So he got a job for Florida Game and Fish Commission, and his target species, the only thing he does is drive around this Jupiter Natural area as well as some other areas in Martin County, targeting this particular species. He just drives around and walks through wetland areas and has a little quart jug and sprays it. That's how invasive it is. They have a pretty much full-time position taking care of this one point. And so it does. Well, I don't think much about stuff like that. The guava likes it really wet. It's an issue out in Big Cypress and in the Everglades. Doesn't mind really wet soils. It'll take an inch or two of inundation for a while. ID by this pretty peeling bark. And I know this picture on the right was taken in probably down in the Everglades. And it's hard to see from this picture. That's a terrestrial tree snail. Quite a unique thing. They don't even occur anywhere north of I-75 in this region. So it's way down south there. Wildlife tends to spread because it loves that food. This is about 8 to 10 inch diameter bear scat, and he's eating nothing but bark. You see him, I see bear scat a lot. But yeah, they spread like crazy, and it does out competes, out shade, the understories. Okay, into the fish. How many raise some of these fish? Anybody raise one of these fish in their tanks? Most of these came from the aquarium industry. Part of the aquarium industry back in the 20s and the 30s was Miami and Homestead. Miami primarily because it was easy to have flights, and these were DC-10s in those days. Flights coming in from Africa and South America because of the Miami airport. So that fish farm settled in there. And it only takes a pretty good tropical storm to dump 12 inches of rain to overflow a pond and fill it out. So many of these species are raw salvage. Some are problematic, some are not. One introduction, the peacock bass from South America, was intentionally introduced in Miami-Dade County into the canals to control the cichlid population. Cichlid has really taken over the main monoculture, especially in small impoundments. When I bought my property, it was loaded with it. And I overstocked bass, I stocked bass about 150 per acre, I put in 300 per acre, then I followed up with hybrid striped bass. A year later, no cichlids. So predators like that in introductions can.
So they use the peacock bass, which is a cichlid, to control cichlids. Does it
Put them in the
really?
canals and then there are other ways to control it. Well, it's not, I don't think it's a cichlid.
Yeah, yes, peacock bass is a cichlid.
So this is a recent trip on the trail. We got a Mayan cichlid here and a top spin catfish or called, this is called Pagostinus. That's a little bit less than catfish water, and that's a typical limestone structure there with a hole there. And he's making nests. All these fish are actively making nests last week. Oh, we had the island apple snail. Quick story on this. About 30 years ago, this started taking over in our wetland areas. It started out feeding our native apple snail. And we had the threat by snail kite, which feeds primarily on the apple snails. It's a raptor type bird, a little bit smaller than an osprey. And it was feared that they wouldn't be able to take that sharp beak and open that curriculum up. Well, fast forward 30 years later, about 7 or 8 generations, comparing museum specimens with current birds, and that beak is significantly enlarged. Open those apples. So, case of rapid evolution. Reptiles, green iguanas, wintertime falling from the trees, brown knolls came in early 1900s, displacing some of our green anoles and other nice native species. One that's kind of cool, but still it's big. It's about 8 or 9 inches. The Agama or African rock lizard. Males with a brightly colored head, and the females below on the right. Then we have this little guy. I don't see too many of these up this way, but they could be as much as 12, 16 inches long. So they can eat pretty much anything that's the size of their head. This one I found at the nursery and dispatched him. All right, what you've been waiting for. We all hear about the Burmese pythons. So this is some of the predators and the exotics in the Everglades ecosystem, just east of here in Naples. We've got lionfish in the coast, pet rays. Cane toads, a big buffalo trove, which is poisonous to cats and dogs. But you're really sap. There's the green iguana, Pagostinus catfish, Nile monitor lizards. And those guys and the tagots can get into burrows into gopher-toads, eggs, which are threatened species. And then, of course, the pythons, they eat every one of these. They start out with mice, go to rats, they go to ibis, wood rats. They can eat alligators and deer. They're not talking. We just had a recent Python challenge, I haven't heard the numbers, but prior to that, a record was set, an 18-foot, which was not necessarily a record, it was 212 pounds, and had 122 eggs, usually it's 80 to 100 eggs, this is a record of the number of eggs. And I caught my first one last week.
Congratulations.
Nothing too exciting, I was cleaning the screen porch and I moved the couch and there he was. Now,
Was in the news a couple days ago.
I think this is close to one of the worst invaders we have. It's cute, it's furry, it's a domestic animal. It's not going to get the attention. But look at these guys, and it's reported to Cornell University and other ornithological organizations that they can eat between 1 and 3 billion. 1 and 3 billion birds per year. And that's, of course, worldwide. And that's feral cats. There's things to control those that they call TNR, trap, neuter, and release. They're sterile, but they're still out there eating wildlife. And some of these cats are really wild too. Then we go to probably the worst invasive species. Maybe not invasive. It's native, but maybe the worst. I came to Florida in 1977 and been wrecking havoc on the environment ever since. But now think about all the other species and everything I talked about. We are responsible for that, whether it's intentional, bringing the nursery trade, or accidental, like planting the Malibu along the southern shore to wake up the chode shore up the dike there. We're responsible for most of that. Literature for those need. So I'm going to do a quick plug. I work on weekends as a naturalist for the Florida National Parks Association. It was created in 1951 through congressional authority. And we operate out of Biscayne, Dry Tortugas, Everybody's National Park, and Big Cypress National Preserve. That's my unit out here in Big Cypress. So when you go to the gift shops and buy the stickers and the plush bears and stuff like that, we sell those and we give the profits back to the National Park Service. So I say this already since 1951, we've given over $5.1 million back to the National Park Service. And this unit's here. So I'm doing sales pitch. If any of you guys are hanging around to do the regular tours, I have brochures here, a couple outside. So I'm open for tours Friday afternoon, Saturday, and then some of the canoe tours. And one of the most popular rivers in North America, you're guaranteed right now, pretty much any season to see blooming native orchids. It's quite spectacular right now, going through mangrove tunnels with dozens and dozens of species of tillandsia or air plants. And this is some of the scenes that you can see. Typical walk. And I mentioned earlier, this is a rain-driven system. And these couple of pictures here, they're taken right off the side of 41. So when you're going to bus tour, press your face up against the window and look. You see these big thunderheads that are coming down. They don't pass through in a matter of minutes. We all clear it. It's definitely a rain-driven system. Now in the wintertime, some of this may be dry, that will generally be dry.
I have a question about that.
Same day, turn around, looking north. Yes.
So I had heard a few years ago that alligators had a real role in water distribution. I guess they create wallers and those fill up with rainwater.
Great question.
So
The question was alligators play a role in water. So basically, cold-blooded, they need water to thermoregulate. And in the wintertime, it gets cool. We had frost out here, 30th and 31st. Everybody's city had frost. That's agricultural zone, but that's almost unheard of. So anyway, alligators need to get down in the water pretty often when they come up. That's the best time to see alligators in winter, sunning on the bank. So what they'll do, and there'll be dozens of them, they take their feet and their tail, wallow out a hole, and they're going to be, 30 or 40, 60 feet in diameter. They'll have a foot or two of water if they're regular. They eat more in that time because everything's concentrated. So yes, they do play a role. And the cypress stones around cypress stones theorize that they could have been alligator holes. because in the middle, it's deeper, it's full of organic matter. That organic decomposition further erodes the very soft limestone, making it even deeper. So ideal habitat in the middle of this trans for ducks and some for. And some could be just simple as thousands of years ago, water level might have been 200 to 400, 1,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. Another good day on the Turner River.